lessons.
Watch The Next Jenny Jones, Monday at 3 on Channel 5. Channel 5's Gale 9, keeping you in touch.
From ABC News, This Week with David Brinkley. Now, from our Washington headquarters, substituting for David Brinkley, here's Sam Donaldson.
They counted the votes this week. More than 1 million people cast their ballots, and the result was overwhelming. 3-1 for the young Elvis Presley stamp. The other election news was even more impressive. Primary voters told pollsters if Ross Perot had been on the ballot, they would have voted for him. He would have beaten George Bush in California, beaten Bill Clinton there, and in Ohio as well. And while Governor Clinton played saxophone and President Bush held a news conference, Perot stole the show by hiring the political operatives who helped make Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan president. The non-politician began a real political campaign. What will the Democrats and Republicans do to keep Ross Perot out of the White House? And what will Perot do to get in? We'll ask today's guest. Ed Rollins, the man who orchestrated Ronald Reagan's re-election, and this week signed on as Ross Perot's campaign co-chairman. Ron Brown, chairman of the Democratic National Committee, and Fred Malek, the Bush Quail campaign manager. Some background from our man, Jack Smith, and our discussion here with George Will, Barbara Walters, and Tom Wicker, all here on our Sunday program. First, a little news. The shockwaves from the surge of Ross Perot continue to roil the political waters. Newt Gingrich, the number 2 man in the Republican House leadership, has written a confidential memo leaked to the Washington Post telling President Bush he may well lose to Perot if he and his advisors don't wake up to the changed situation. Gingrich complains that the Bush campaign is trying to force 1992 politics into a conventional mold, and it won't work. On the Democratic side, Governor Mario Cuomo has been proposing that Bill Clinton get together with the congressional Democratic leadership, agree on a first 100 days program, then make a public announcement in which Clinton and the leadership pledge to pass and sign it. The message being that neither the president nor Ross Perot can get that level of cooperation from the democratically controlled Congress. ABC News has learned that Clinton has bought the idea and will do it. In Britain, the news is less political and more scandal. The papers there this morning are headlining the gossip that Princess Diana has attempted suicide 5 times since her marriage to Prince Charles 10 years ago. The allegation is that she is jealous of her husband's friendship with another woman and believes suicide is the only way out of a loveless royal marriage. A short time ago, Buckingham Palace issued a statement saying Diana did not cooperate with the author of the book that's being serialized in the paper. We'll be back with all the rest of today's program in a moment.
This Week with David Brinkley, brought to you by GE. From satellites to medical systems, we bring good things to life. And by ADM, supermarket to the world.
But I could not believe it when I ate it. It was just, they're just absolutely wonderful.
I've learned to like them quite a bit. We take them home and eat them pretty regularly.
They were really delicious. I liked them. They're just good. Oh, they'd get a 10 for sure.
They're talking about it in the Midwest.
It's quick. I know it's nutritious. It's going to be good for me.
Bob has a high cholesterol problem, so they really solve a lot of problems for our whole family.
And soon it may be on the lips of people everywhere.
If he says it's good, it is really good.
Yeah, I like them.
It's the Midland Harvest brand Harvest Burger, an all-vegetable patty from the Archer Daniels Midland Company. Harvest Burgers are low in fat, low in calories, free of cholesterol, and contain dietary fiber. Qualities that are in growing demand by today's health-conscious consumers. And what are people saying about the taste? We couldn't have said it better ourselves. ADM, supermarket to the world.
If we didn't know better, we'd think we were watching an old cowboy western, one in which the good government settler family is about to be burned out by the inside the Beltway outlaw gang, when out of the west rides a masked man on a great white horse, shouting, "Hi-ho, troubles away." Ross Perot has become a political force unprecedented in modern times. But is he an unstoppable force? Maybe not. But as Jack Smith reports, the men who would have to stop him, George Bush and Bill Clinton, don't seem to have a clue so far as to how to do it. Jack?
Sam, this was candidate Bill Clinton's first stop after clinching the Democratic nomination this week. A gig on Arsenio Hall's syndicated talk show. And President Bush's first move in this brief lull before the party conventions was to hold a rare primetime news conference, the second of his presidency, which only CNN would carry because the networks judged it too political.
So why don't you tell us what you really think about Ross Perot?
Hey, what's that have to do with it? Come on.
As the primary season ended this week, the candidates weren't squaring off against each other, but scrambling for airtime, racing to catch up with this man.
Great to be here.
Ross Perot, the unannounced third-party independent who is changing the face of American politics. Exit polls in California's primary this week showed that if he'd been running there, he'd have beaten Bush and Clinton both. And some national polls have him ahead, too. Time magazine, 13% ahead. Newsweek, 35% to Bush's 33% and Clinton's 25%.
Perot's supporters are gathering signatures to put his name on the ballot in all 50 states. And they are mounting the first truly viable third-party challenge in modern times by tapping into a vast reservoir of voter anger.
The federal government sucks. Yeah. In one word.
I think we need a change. I'm just so sick of them fighting the two parties and not the issues.
It won't be Bush and it won't be Clinton. I guess that leaves Ross.
I thought I might vote for Ross Perot.
He's just a breath of fresh air for the country, I think.
This week, Perot transformed his campaign by recruiting two of the biggest names in the business of presidential campaign politics. Democrat Hamilton Jordan and Republican Ed Rollins. Both have run the sort of anti-establishment campaigns, Jordan for Jimmy Carter and Rollins for Ronald Reagan, that Perot seems to envision for himself.
I just think we have a system that doesn't work today.
It was a sharp break for Rollins, who was a member of the GOP establishment. In fact, his wife Sherry, who supports the president, resigned a top job at the White House when she saw a conflict.
I'm leaving because I think it's in the best interest of the administration for me to not be at the White House at this time.
Perot has benefited enormously from not having to define himself. It hasn't been a good year for conventional wisdom. Nevertheless, conventional wisdom is that when he does start clarifying his positions, he'll slip.
We don't know much about him yet. We know very little, but it's going to come out. We're going to hear about it, believe me.
But hopes that Perot will fizzle out ignore the depth of voter anger this year and the fact that Perot has pledged to spend 2 or 3 times what either Bush or Clinton has available.
If you've got $100 million or $200 million, you're not going to disappear. You may screw up and lose, but you're going to be in the hunt because you will have visibility.
When Bill Clinton got into this race about a year ago, he had a game plan in mind. George Bush had a game plan in mind as recently as 4 months ago. Those game plans won't work anymore.
The quirkiness of a three-way race means that states, once thought safe for one candidate or the other, no longer are. And so far, Perot seems to be hurting the two parties about equally. It's thought Perot at least could stop anyone getting a majority in November, throwing the election into the democratically controlled House of Representatives.
It is an indictment on the leadership of both major parties that you're now in a situation where the American people don't feel confidence that there is an agenda of courage that will give this country a sense of its own salvation and survival.
Could Ross Perot really be the next tenant in the White House? The answer seems to be yes. At least it's clear now he's not going to go away. Perot has already turned the political establishment on its head this year, and that's exactly what voters seem to want. Sam?
Thanks, Jack. Coming next, Democratic National Committee Chairman Ron Brown. And shortly, Fred Malek, manager of the Bush Quail campaign, and Ed Rollins, co-chairman of the Perot campaign. In a moment.
Every 7 seconds of every day, someone is going somewhere with GE because over 200 of the world's airlines rely on the power of GE jet engines.
Tokyo and Kokomo and Marrakesh and Budapest and Sydney, Monte Carlo, San Diego, Santiago, Barcelona, Arizona, Bora Bora, Glacamora, and Siena, and Vienna, and New York and County Cork. GE in the air, we'll be there.
And since every year more and more people are going to more and more places, GE has developed the jet engine of the future, the GE90. More powerful, more fuel efficient, cleaner, and quieter than any jet engine ever made.
Johannesburg and Uruguay and Malibu and Paraguay and Rome and Santa Fe and Cincinnati and LA. And there is Canada and Malaga and Rimini and Brindisi, New Delhi, Kansas City, and a town without a penny.
GE, coming every 7 seconds to an airport near you.
As Nancy Walsh saves for her son's education, her savings and those of millions like her are invested in business. When business grows, our nation prospers and becomes more competitive in the world, which could open up a world of opportunities. And who will be there seeking out those opportunities for you and Nancy Walsh? Merrill Lynch. We're bullish on the future.
Why are so many babies in one American town dying or being born with birth defects? In search of the invisible killer, a primetime investigation Thursday.
One patient, one doctor, and a miracle that changed their lives. A story almost beyond belief. Watch 2020, Friday.
Joining us now from New York is Democratic National Committee Chairman Ron Brown. Mr. Brown, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good to be with you, Sam.
And here with me in the studio to join in the questioning are George Will and Barbara Walters, both of ABC News. Now, Mr. Brown, I said a minute ago that Bill Clinton didn't seem to have a clue as to how to stop Ross Perot. Here's your chance to tell me how wrong I am, and if you think I was wrong, tell me exactly how he intends to stop Perot.
Well, I think you're very wrong, Sam. I'm the guy who's been sitting with you over the last year, even when George Bush was at 90% in the polls, telling you we're going to elect a Democrat president of the United States because this election is going to be decided on basic bread and butter economic issues, that the American people want change. It's clear about that. There's only one candidate who can't possibly be the candidate of change, and that's George Bush. He's the epitome of the status quo. Bill Clinton has a plan for change. George Bush has no plan. Ross Perot evidently has no plan. The American people don't know who he is or what he stands for or what he believes in. He has not faced one voter in one election yet.
Well, now, what do you
Let's remember that, Sam. He hasn't faced one voter in one election yet. It's one thing to ask voters...
It sounds like the voters are chomping at the bit to get
Sam,
the opportunity.
it's one thing to ask a voter in May or June, what would you do if the election was held today? The election is not held today. It's held the first Tuesday in November.
Right.
We have 5 months between now and Election Day.
Very quickly, tell me what you think of the idea we reported on a few minutes ago that we understand Governor Clinton has bought, which is to agree with the Democratic leadership of Congress on a 100-day agenda of legislation and then publicly announce that only he can get that kind of cooperation.
Frankly, Sam, it's not an idea that Governor Clinton has bought. It's one he's had. I visited with him with leadership in the House and Senate over a month and a half ago where that subject was talked about, a 100-day agenda. I think Mario Cuomo is absolutely right. The American people think that change involves more than just rhetoric. Saying you want change is fine, but actually implementing change, becoming an agent for change, being able to get things done, that's going to be the test. Bill Clinton, over his career, has proven he can do that. He can change government. He can change institutions. He can make our system work. The only way to make it work in the United States, as far as I know, unless we have a new constitution, is for the Congress and the President to work closely together. George Bush can't work with the Congress. There's nothing in Ross Perot's background to indicate that he has any chance of working effectively with the legislative branch. Bill Clinton can do that. We're going to have a Democratic Congress after the November elections and a Democratic president working with that Congress and get America back on track.
George?
Mr. Brown, Mr. Malek, who will be here shortly from the Bush campaign, has said that he thinks it really will be a two-person race this fall. He's just not sure who the two people are. And some people have said what's going on right now is the Clinton-Perot primary, to see who emerges as the principal challenger to George Bush. Is that an invidious and unfair distinction?
Yeah, I think that's Republican wishful thinking. They would like to have two Republicans, Ross Perot and George Bush, running for president, and them being the only two. That's not the way it is. As a matter of fact, the latest polls make, as incredible as it sounds, the incumbent president the most irrelevant. Running third in the Time CNN poll to Ross Perot and Bill Clinton. I think this is a roller coaster ride between now and November. It's going to be up and down. I think we all overreact to the latest overnight polls. I think it is likely to be, if you ask for my personal judgment, a two-way contest between George Bush and Bill Clinton. I think Bill Clinton is going to win that contest. That doesn't mean I don't believe Ross Perot is going to be a factor. I think he's a major factor. I take him seriously. But I think as the American people Wait, can I just finish?
Yeah,
as the American people scrutinize him the way they scrutinize anybody who is seeking the presidency of the United States, and that scrutiny has not started yet. Ross Perot has had a free ride. He hasn't answered any tough questions yet. As he does, my sense is that that popularity will fade.
I gather you think he's a Republican. You said this is Republican propaganda.
Well, he always has been a Republican.
Well, let me slow down. Now, are you saying that your knowledge of his views is such that you think he is basically a conservative?
Frankly, George, like most Americans, I have very limited knowledge of Ross Perot's views. He hasn't articulated them. He's always ducked the tough questions which allow us to do a real assessment. I don't know what he stands for. What I've heard, frankly, a lot of what I've heard is frightening. It indicates a real lack of tolerance, almost kind of an Elmer Gantry approach, that you can get people kind of revved up to walk down a path and they don't even know where that path is taking them.
In your answer to Sam a moment ago, you said that part of Clinton's strength is that he would be able to work with Congress. The Democratic Congress, Democratic-controlled Congress, is probably the most detested instrument of American governance right now. Is that a good way to go into the campaign, saying, I can get along with these
people? First, that is no longer accurate. As you are a poll watcher, too, and the polls now say that George Bush is more detested than the Congress, and that Ross Perot is not as popular as the Congress. So I don't know that that's an accurate assessment of present-day thinking, George.
I'd like to ask some questions about decisions that you have to make in the very near future. Probably more than most elections, the vice president is extremely important. People are so concerned about the heartbeat away from the president. Ross Perot has said he's even going to make his vice president his chief of staff. What advice are you giving Governor Clinton? Should he choose him according to geography, ideology, a bold man, an ethical man? And also, could you give us examples, and would you tell us if this is going to be announced before the convention?
Well, first, I think Bill Clinton is going about it in exactly the right way, in a very thoughtful way. He's appointed a team of distinguished Americans to help him narrow the field, to make some recommendations to him, and the criteria are very simple. One, who can be President of the United States? And who can be effective as President of the United States? Clearly, that is not a process that George Bush used in choosing Dan Quayle. Secondly, who is compatible with Bill Clinton? Who can work as part of that team? And third, who helps the ticket? I think geography, frankly, has little to do with it. Bill Clinton has not yet decided whether he's going to make that announcement before the convention or at the convention. Whatever way he does it, I would expect, of course, the convention to support the choice of the nominee. I expect the person, frankly, to be among the new generation of political leadership in America.
You wouldn't like to be bold enough to throw out a few names?
Oh, I'm certainly bold enough, but I'm not silly enough to do that while Bill Clinton is still making those considerations.
All right, let me ask you another question also on strategy for the future. It said this is the year of the woman, and we see now women being nominated for positions in the Senate more than before. Let's talk about Hillary Clinton for a moment. Mrs. Ross Perot came across as a woman of traditional values. I got a great deal of mail about her. People seem to like her. Barbara Bush, enormously popular. Traditional values. Are you advising Hillary Clinton to stress the traditional, the family, the children, more than the work? Is there something that you're advising so that she becomes an asset, a total asset, rather than
I think she's
going
to be doing both. I think she is not at all a liability. I think she's an asset now, and I think she's going to be a greater asset as this campaign goes on and as the American people get to know her. You're right, Barbara. This is a very important year in American politics because women are emerging. I think that gives Bill Clinton a tremendous advantage. We're going to have a minimum of 5 and maybe more Democratic women running for the United States Senate, running with Bill Clinton in important states like California and Pennsylvania and Illinois. That's going to be an extraordinary help because we're right on all those issues that the American women care most about.
George, we just have a few seconds.
Mr. Brown, I know your view is that Mr. Clinton will win this in November, but people in Washington are taking seriously the possibility that this will be decided in January in the House, and I'd like your thought on the ethics of how to vote in the House. If you're a Democratic congressman from a district that Ross Perot wins, and George Bush wins the popular vote, and Clinton wins your state, how do you vote?
Well, let me say this, Sam. If it goes into the House of Representatives, I sure would much rather be Bill Clinton than George Bush or Ross Perot. This will be a democratically controlled House. Democrats will control most of the state delegations.
Your answer is then the party loyalty?
I would assume that Democrats would vote for Bill Clinton. Yes, Democrats in the House of Representatives should take into consideration the views of their constituents, and then they ought to vote their conscience. And I would certainly expect that Democrats would be likely to support the candidate of their party.
You know, Chairman Brown, you recall that famous Jack Kennedy phrase, sometimes party loyalty asks too much.
Well, I don't think that's going to be, first of all, I don't think it's going to go into the House. I think it's going to be decided on the first Tuesday in November. I think Bill Clinton is going to have a majority of the electoral vote.
Thank you very much. Chairman Ron Brown, Chairman of the Democratic National Committee. Coming next, Fred Malek, manager for the Bush Quayle campaign. And then Ed Rollins, the new co-chairman of Ross Perot's campaign for president. In a moment.
This Week with David Brinkley, brought to you by Merrill Lynch. We're bullish on the future.
Risk. As hard as it is to live with, it's impossible to live without. At Merrill Lynch, we know that risk can be dealt with. It can be managed. It can even be turned to your advantage. To do that, you need a partner. A partner who understands it and can help you turn a world of risk into a world of opportunity. Merrill Lynch. We're bullish on the future.
Imagine your refrigerator with bigger door shelves for bigger bottles, with leftovers left in quick-serve trays for leftover space, more space, nearly 27 cubic feet, and a door in the door for things you use more. Imagine GE's Space Center 27.
This Week with David Brinkley will continue in a moment.
Is it compassion or murder? On the next Good Morning America, the man some call Dr. Death.
And later in the week, married to Brady Bunch style, why you don't have to go broke on Good Morning America.
Alexander's Photo Center is more than just a camera store. Of course, we have new and pre-owned camera equipment, film, photo finishing and accessories, camera repairs, passports, and friendly help. But also you'll find darkroom accessories and supplies, the best custom black and white lab in town, professional commercial photography in studio or on location, plus rental equipment, rental darkroom, and studio for amateurs or pros. Come in and let us help you at Alexander's Photo Center and Commercial Photography, where we offer you more.
When severe weather hits central Iowa, turn to the storm team that keeps you in touch. At Channel 5, 3 meteorologists use their expertise to track dangerous storms. With the exclusive Guardian Lightning Tracker, Pam Dale, Rick Mitchell, and Dave Rexroth will warn you first during severe storm conditions. When you need to know the weather, turn to Channel 5. Weather you can count on. Channel 5's Dennis Doda, keeping you in touch.
Mr. Malek, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to see you this morning. You probably saw Newt Gingrich's memo even before the Washington Post saw it. The one in which he says that you're going to lose, meaning President Bush is going to lose, if you insist on making this year's campaign look like every other year's campaign. Do you buy that? Do you have to change?
I think what Newt was pointing out, and he is a very, very valued counselor, what he's pointing out is that there's a lot of protest vote out there. And what you're seeing out there is Ross Perot really capitalizing on that protest vote. He's coming on and saying, I'm for change, the government's not doing enough, we need to do more. Well, lo and behold, that's what George Bush feels. He feels also the government's not doing enough, and we need to accomplish more.
But he is the government. I mean, that's the disadvantage of having to run as the incumbent this year.
But Sam, the difference is George Bush has a plan. He's got a plan that encompasses a balanced budget amendment, educational reform, welfare reform, a program to increase exports. He's got a very specific plan in place.
Well, if he has a plan, Mr. Malek, apparently he's not getting it out there. Let me give you a specific. This last week he held a news conference, and the broadcast networks didn't cover it. Doesn't that make him look silly when he says, I've got a plan and I want to tell the American people, and no one sees it? I mean, CNN covered it. They had 1.2 million households. The broadcast networks had 37 million available, and he didn't have them.
Look, I think the important thing is that the president had a very important message for the future of the American economy, and that was the importance of passing a balanced budget amendment. It's a shame.
But who heard it?
It's a shame that networks didn't think that was a serious enough topic to want to cover.
Do you blame the networks, or do you blame yourself for miscalculating?
What we're trying to do, what the president wants to do, is he wants to get public support, marshal public support, so we can stop mortgaging our future, so we can ensure that the discipline exists in the Congress and in the government of the United States to ensure that we balance our checkbooks just like every household around the country has to balance theirs. An important message. It's going to get across, and I think the President's going to get enactment of a balanced budget amendment.
This important story the President had has been the President's position for years and years and years. He's been in favor of a balanced budget, so why should people get excited about it now?
I think we're at a point in time now where we've tried every other means to get the budget into balance.
Except submitting one.
And
I mean, your man has been part of an administration now for 12 years that has quadrupled the national debt.
Well, wait a minute, George. The President has submitted a budget to the United States Congress. It's about this thick. It's been reviewed by about 100 committees of Congress. It's had several hundred administration witnesses troop up to Capitol Hill in the full public view and testify on it. And it does lead to a balanced budget by 1997. I think what we should be looking for is where are the proposals from the other candidates? How does Bill Clinton plan to balance the budget? The only thing we've heard from him so far is he said a few days ago in Los Angeles that the only way to curb the deficit is through a massive tax increase. And from Ross Perot, we haven't heard a thing.
Speaking of Ross Perot, when you have a three-person race, some people think that the usual logic is thrown out the window. The usual logic is you try and get to the center and work out. Three-person race, maybe you shore up your base. And the Republican part of that means the conservatives. Mr. Brown a moment ago seemed to indicate his view, and some polls indicate that a lot of people agree with him, that Ross Perot is basically a conservative. How would you tell Republican conservatives that they're making a mistake supporting Ross Perot? Is he a conservative?
Well, first of all, I don't think he is a conservative. But second of all, nobody really knows where he stands on the issues. He's just brought on board two new campaign consultants, one of whom is a conservative Republican and one of whom is a liberal Democrat. I'm not sure where he stands, and I'm not sure the American people know where he stands. Ross Perot says that the issues don't matter, and I think he's dead wrong on that. I think the issues do matter, and what this election is all about is who has the record in office, where do people stand on the issues, and what is their agenda for the future of this country. I'd like to hear that from Ross Perot.
You know, there's something else. It's much more than the issues, which you've been talking about, the President's been talking about, Governor Clinton's talking about, and that's passion and ideology. And one of the biggest criticisms about President Bush is that he doesn't seem to have an ideology. People talk about Ronald Reagan and they say you may or may not have liked him, but we knew where he stood. Can you tell me what the President is passionate about? And a balanced budget doesn't sound too inspirational.
I'm glad you asked that. I wish the American people had the opportunity that I've had of getting to know this man, close up for the past 20 years, and know how decent he is, how passionate he feels about this country, and about what he wants.
But more than that.
Let me get at that.
Okay, what does he want to do in his second term? What's the most important?
Here's what he feels passionate about. He feels passionate about an economic opportunity for all Americans. He feels passionate that all Americans deserve the chance to get a sound education. He feels deeply and convincingly that we need strong law and order in order to secure our neighborhoods and streets. He believes in fundamental family values. He believes in a national defense capable of securing world peace. These are some of the things he believes in.
Maybe it would have been better if he picked one or two rather than a whole list.
But you asked me what he believed in.
Okay, let me put it another way. A year ago, he was a hero, not just in this country, but throughout the world. It's 1 year later, and we felt the passion, we felt the strength. It's 1 year later, and a man who was almost totally unknown a year ago is now in the polls running ahead. Not on issues, but on fire, on fearlessness, all these kind of ephemeral qualities. What went wrong in the past year?
Well, let's look at what happened. We've had an 18-month recession. It was a vexing recession. It was a troubling recession. We had people out of work, and we had people troubled by it. We are now coming out of that recession, but we're not moving it rapidly enough. As we were coming out of the recession, we had a primary season. There were 5 Democrats. There was a Republican and an independent all taking shots at the president. Now we're coming out of that. And I think we're getting down to the point where people are going to get past those kind of battles and start deciding on who has the qualifications to be president, who has the experience, the seasoning, the stability, the character, the proven record under fire to be president of the United States. Who can sit in that Oval Office for the next 4 years?
The latest Times CNN poll indicates that your man has a double-digit deficit to Ross Perot. And I think it also says that a majority of the country wishes that he would run with a different vice presidential candidate. Now, Mr. Bush has said he will do whatever it takes to get reelected. If it looks in the next month or so that it would help him get reelected to run with someone other than Mr. Quayle, would he consider that? Do you think it's an absolute closed question?
I think it's a closed question, and let me tell you something about those polls. There's a big difference between the polls, exit polls and the like in June, and what people say in November in the voting booth. And if you don't believe me, you ought to ask President Dukakis or President Mondale.
Well, you may want to answer another question that I have by saying it's closed. Sam Skinner, who's the chief of staff, under great fire, it's said that the White House staff is the most inept, by its critics, of course, that we've seen in modern times. Will he remain chief of staff?
Let me tell you something, Sam. I run some big companies. I ran the biggest hotel company in the country and the fourth biggest airline in my time, and I've seen how difficult it is to run an organization, a big organization. Sam and his staff has taken a couple of months to get up to speed with this. They are doing a fine job, exerting fine leadership over that staff, working extremely well with us, and I don't envision any change.
All right, what about the campaign? It's also said that James A. Baker III, the great Svengali of Bush politics, certainly, is going to have to come back in some form, either directly, by stepping down as Secretary of State, or by sending his man over to the White House for the campaign to run it. Truth to that?
I don't think so. Not at all. Jim Baker is an extraordinary public servant. He's doing a phenomenal job as Secretary of State. He has indicated he wishes to stay there, and the President has indicated his full confidence in the campaign team and the White House team.
Meaning you?
Of course.
All right. Thanks very much, Fred Malek. Thanks for being with us today. Coming next, Ed Rollins, co-chairman of the Perot for President campaign.
The Proctor National Bank is closed for the holiday.
This is Dr. Martell. We are closed until tomorrow.
Due to record snowfall, all town services will be closed.
You have reached Lucci Plumbing. I am indisposed at the moment.
We wish you a Merry Christmas, but we are not here.
Ever try to get help on a holiday or even a weekend? It's nearly impossible. Unless, of course, you're calling one very special number.
GE Answer Center may help you.
365 days a year, 24 hours a day, GE's Answer Center is there to help. Whether you're thinking of buying a GE appliance or already own one.
My son just put marbles in the ice maker.
Don't worry, man.
On weekends, holidays, or darkness of night, the GE Answer Center never closes.
GE Answer Center, happy holiday.
You're open. I can't believe it.
We're always here. How can I help you?
Bring good things to life.
Today, Motown will be rocking. Indy 500 winner Al Unser Jr. and the Sports Best hit the streets for the ITT Automotive Detroit Grand Prix.
Then after the race, join me, Jack Nicklaus, along with the world's top players for the final round of a very special golf event, the Memorial Tournament. A telecast sponsored by Dean Witter. Today on ABC Sports.
Mr. Rollins, welcome. In a sense, you and Hamilton Jordan are the men of the hour, having signed on with Ross Perot. And let me just ask you about your motives to begin with. Here you are, a good Republican, or at least in the past you have been. Helped elect Ronald Reagan president. That's the Reagan-Bush team. It is said that you would have worked for Mr. Bush this time if they hadn't insulted you by saying just take one state, California. And you never met Ross Perot till last weekend. Why can't we just assume that you're a hired gun doing it simply because, not for the money, because you can't stand not to be in the game?
Well, first of all, I've never done my politics for money. I basically volunteered to be chairman for Jack Kemp in 1988. Ronald Reagan, I took the same price I took when I was in the White House. That's not my motivation. My motivation is that I've been a student and a teacher and a practitioner of government for most of my life. I think there's a movement in America today that's demanding change. I see Ross Perot as a candidate who can obviously, he's not part of the system, that he can come to Washington and make those changes. He's got a lifelong history of being a leader. I think we have a morass here that just is frustrating the American public, and obviously it was a very difficult decision for me to walk away from my party, and obviously I'm going to do everything I can to help elect him.
He's not part of Washington, but how do you answer the criticism that if he became president, he and the democratically controlled Congress would just stalemate?
Well, first of all, there's no absolute assumption that it's going to be a Democrat-controlled Congress. There's a mood for change in this country. There may be as many as 125 new members of Congress who will be elected in this environment of change, and I'm not sure you can't have coalitional government that obviously can address some very significant issues facing this country.
Sparing us, please, the boilerplate that you're going to win it all in November and all of that.
Certainly going to try.
One way to get to be president this year would be to win, say, California, Florida, Texas, and a few other states, throwing it into for Mr. Perot to do this, to throw it into the House and win there on the basis of a huge popular vote surge. Is that a strategy you're considering?
I think at this stage, George, we're just beginning to put our strategy together. I think you have to have a three-track strategy this time. First, I don't concede that we're going to lose the popular vote and only do well in the Electoral College. I think obviously a plurality.
I was really thinking the reverse, that you'd win just enough electoral votes to deny anyone a majority, but do very well in the popular.
Well, certainly our goal is to do well in the three tracks. One being certainly the popularity vote. Second, the electoral strategy, which has to be very carefully mapped out. And the third this time, I think, is really a congressional strategy. You've got to go district by district and try and add pressure and obviously ask people who are running for office this time, particularly new members, how are they going to vote? They're going to vote, as Ron Brown says, no matter who wins, vote Democratic partisanship, or are you automatically going to vote for a Republican president, or are you going to basically vote how the district goes for president? And I think that's part of the strategy.
You referred to yourself a moment ago as a student and teacher of government, and we're all trying to decipher the views of Mr. Perot from his somewhat Delphic remarks. And I want to ask you about two of them. He said to the editors when he met with them here in town, it would be easy to cut $400 billion from the deficit. Now, I don't want you to cut the $400 billion this morning, but I want you to tell us, why does Mr. Perot think this easy job hasn't been done by anyone? Because the country's demanding it. It would please people, we think. I mean, you'd think it would. They said they want a balanced budget. If it's easy, why does Perot think no one can do it but him?
Oh, I don't think he thinks he's the only one who can do it, and I think obviously the $400 billion answer was one that he's rethought today, and obviously he's brought in some very fine economic advisors.
He no longer thinks it's easy?
I don't think he thinks it's easy. First of all, the president doesn't get to do it by himself. I mean, the problem that we face, as you know better than anybody, is we're spending $3 for every $2 in revenue. I mean, a person who was making $50,000 a year, if they were spending $75,000 a year, they'd be in bankruptcy very quickly. And I think the bottom line is that you've got to find some solutions, and you've got to have the will to make some very tough decisions. I think the problem with the political process today is that both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue have the other end as a convenient scapegoat. Democrats blame the president, say he won't make the tough decisions. President blames the Democrats, saying he can't get anything through the Congress. And I think what it's going to take is a catalyst of change who comes here and say, friends, we've got to solve this problem. We've got to get an economy that's moving, that basically gives Americans the lifestyle that they've come to enjoy and want to enjoy in the future.
You refer to tough decisions. Most decisions are tough in this town because they hurt people. People have conflicting desires in this country, a big welfare state and low taxes, for example. Tell me what Mr. Perot thinks this electronic town meeting is going to do. A lot of people say that's exactly the last thing we need, which is some other way to record public opinion to which the government's already too obedient.
Well, first of all, I think the whole town meeting thing has been so blown out of proportion.
By whom?
Well, first of all, you've got Mr. Clinton, who's now talking about having town meetings. The president is now talking about going back to his Meet George forum, which are town meetings. Members of Congress have town meetings all the time.
But what does Mr. Perot think they're for?
I think Mr. Perot thinks that he wants to involve the people in the political process beyond just every 4 years allowing them to vote for president or every 2 years to vote for Congress. I think what he's trying to say is that we're going to have topics that we're going to have discussion on very serious topics, health care, rebuilding the infrastructure, education.
Discussion of health care on television with 250 million people?
Well, there's no reason that millions of Americans can't tune in and watch debate among experts.
That's not discussion, watching something.
Well, certainly, and use the modern techniques of telecommunication, which allows people to have an input. And I think that's what he's talking in terms of. I think it's absurd for us to say in this changing evolutionary revolution of telecommunications that we got to do things the same way we did 100 years ago.
I want to talk about issues. We've been hammering away at the Republican and Democratic representatives today, and I was talking about passion. But President Bush has been talking about issues. People do know where he stands. Governor Clinton has been talking about issues. And yet they're up against a man who doesn't, but who seems to have fire and a courage. Now, you said the other night on Nightline, and I quote, if he, Perot, becomes specific on issues like entitlements or that he's going to change this or change that, the Bush White House will rip him apart, and the media will as well. He should talk in broad terms of what his goals and objectives are. In other words, no issues, just keep these generalities. As soon as he becomes specific, he's in trouble. Is that going to be your strategy?
It's certainly not the total strategy. I think the bottom line is you've got to talk about the areas that you're going to address and your formula for addressing them. But to go out and I don't expect the President to put out his next year's budget. I don't expect Mr. Clinton to put out his budget in specific terms in the course of this campaign.
But they've been far more specific than Mr. Perot.
I think you'll find in the very near future that Mr. Perot is going to get very specific on a lot of issues. The critical thing in this election, I think, Barbara, is really leadership. The American public is craving leadership. They don't see it from either Mr. Clinton.
But they're going to know what he's leading them to.
Well, obviously, he's going to lead them to some sort of an economic stability, which is what's first and foremost in most people's mind. I think the problem that people see with the president, who's a very fine man and a very decent man, his interest is in foreign affairs. It's always been foreign affairs.
Let me just ask you one thing in this. How are we going to find this out? Are you going to suggest white papers? Is he going to do this on 30-minute informationals that we've read? Is he going to do it on talk shows? When and how are we going to find out?
I think it'll be all of the above. I don't think it's unrealistic to say to a man who started his candidacy 10 weeks ago, who basically asked for 30 to 45 days to put his positions together. I don't think that's so unreasonable. You've had Clinton, who's been running for president for 10 years. You have George Bush, who's been president and vice president for 12 years. I think you should applaud the fact the man's going to take the time to come up with some significant dialogue on issues.
Let me ask you a question about you. Because we have many marriages in which two people hold jobs. Why did your wife have to sacrifice her job? Why didn't you sacrifice yours and stay where you were and let her be at the Bush White House where she was doing very well?
That would have been a very easy decision to have made for me. I had a very comfortable life, and obviously I'm very proud of what my wife has done. This was not a career decision. I personally made my decision because I believe in going out and trying to change the system. Sherry had to make her decision.
But didn't you sort of make it for her?
No,
by announcing
she had to make her decision. And I think if the White House would have been very smart, they would have kept someone who's a very strong Bush supporter. She was a Bush supporter in 1980 when I supported Reagan. She was a Bush supporter in 1988 when I supported Jack Kemp. And I think they should have kept her there.
George, I know you have another question. Let me just follow up on what you brought up, Barbara, because it is a sensitive subject, and in this town particularly, since so many of us know both you and your wife. And I know that the two of you care for each other a great deal. But, Mr. Rollins, I suggested in some senses she has been humiliated now. Because, first of all, when the White House hired her, a lot of people said they just did that to neutralize Ed Rollins. And that may not have been true. And now the talk is, of course, that she has had, as Barbara suggests, to defer her own agenda and her own career and her own preference just to suit you, her husband.
First of all, that's absurd. And obviously the great difficulty in making this decision was my wife. My wife is a very talented woman who obviously will do extremely well. I think, and she had to make her decision just as I had to make my decision. This wasn't a swapping off. This was a real thing of conscience for both of us. And she did not feel that she would be as helpful to the president because of my role running a campaign against him. And I think that's a real matter of conscience on her part. I had to make my decision. It was a real matter of conscience. I go back to my point. The easiest thing would have been status quo. I was making a lot of money, doing very well. But
you're a player. You can't stand not to be in the game.
That's not true.
Let me ask you a short answer, a short response to a hypothesis, which is as follows. Mr. Perot's fundamental job is to fracture the president's base. Perhaps the quickest way to do that would be by picking a Republican, prominent Republican, as a vice presidential running mate. And some people even think that Mr. Bush is particularly vulnerable among Republican women on abortion and other issues. So a Republican woman might be a good running mate. Is that a sensible hypothesis?
It certainly would be part of any kind of dialogue that went on. Mr. Perot has said he wants the most qualified person he can find.
They all say that.
Well, I think the reality is he's going to try and reach out to that. I don't think anybody has sat down and looked at a coalition. You have to remember, this is a campaign that started 10 weeks ago. Most of this campaign has been done by 20 people who were Gulf veterans who went to work for Mr. Perot 10 weeks ago and have run around this country with millions and millions of volunteers qualifying people for petitions. We now have to start a campaign, and obviously that's what Hamilton's and my role will be.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rollins.
Thank you.
We hope you'll come back, and we hope that you'll suggest to Mr. Perot that he'll accept eventually our invitation to come back on this program.
I'm sure he will. Thank you very much.
And coming next, our roundtable discussion about this and that and everything else, and joining us will be Tom Wicker in a moment.
2800 dishwasher. It does almost everything but clear the table.
GE, we bring good things to life.
There's change in the air. Big change. Fares with savings up to 50% in the U.S. United Airlines announces fare fares for business travelers, first-class flyers, and vacationers, too. Now when you fly, you'll find dramatic savings and exchangeable, more flexible tickets. It's our economic plan to lift the nation. From the airline that's uniting the world. United. Come fly the friendly skies.
I'm paid to buy the high-volume copies. I don't want to have to worry about them.
The corporate line from Canon.
It's simple. If our copiers are working, our people are working.
High-volume copying systems so reliable, you don't have to think about them.
All I want to know is it keeps copying, sorting, stapling. End of story.
The corporate line from Canon, the #1 copier company, and the new power in high-volume copying.
As Nancy Walsh saves for her son's education, her savings and those of millions like her are invested in business. When business grows, our nation prospers and becomes more competitive in the world, which could open up a world of opportunities. And who will be there seeking out those opportunities for you and Nancy Walsh? Merrill Lynch. We're bullish on the future.
On the American agenda, dying coral reefs, animal and plant species disappearing. Are these early signs of global warming? Plus, would speeding the FDA's drug approval process hurt more people than it would help?
If I have to select a model, that is the model of American FDA.
Peter Jennings on ABC's World News Tonight this week.
Well, it's a pretty pass, as the expression goes. Bill Clinton can only get on television and get noticed if he plays the saxophone with Arsenio Hall. George Bush holds a news conference. He can't get on television. Ross Perot can get on television anytime he wants. What have we come to, George?
Well, obviously the electorate is disgusted with professional politics at the moment, and therefore they're going for an amateur, and that's his principal recommendation. But, you know, the voters this year are said to be volatile, and indeed they may be, but I think the basic outcome of this election is already known. We're going to have a weak plurality president. Mr. Clinton is probably the weakest challenger to an incumbent since John Davis in 1924. It took the Democrats 103 ballots to nominate him. And George Bush is probably the weakest incumbent seeking re-election since Andrew Johnson in 1868.
What do you make of it, Barbara?
I want to go back to what you said about the saxophone playing and hear what you think. Maybe it gets you young voters. Maybe it shows that he's a regular guy. Maybe the next thing that Bill Clinton does is go on Saturday Night Live. Am I just such an old fogey that I thought that it was undignified?
Not you, Barbara.
Oh, sorry
Not
to
old
say
fogey.
it. Young fogey, whatever. I mean, there's something about the presidential candidate with his shades on, playing the saxophone that's endearing on one hand, but not very dignified.
Well,
now,
Tom,
in terms of strategy, was this a good thing to do?
Well, Tom, that's the thing. In the old days, you tried to be presidential and tried to look serious. Barbara talks about, Arsenio Hall has a big audience, but you look at their demographics, they're 36 years of age or younger, and those people don't vote very much.
Well, maybe they will as a consequence of that. But I tend to agree that that was undignified, as you say. I don't think a president has to maintain a certain stuffed shirt dignity or a presidential candidate, but I don't know, the association with jazz music and dark shades and the Arsenio Hall and show, I don't think that's an asset in running for the presidency. Now, I don't mean to knock Arsenio Hall at all, but I mean, I think people associate that with a different kind of notoriety.
Well, maybe he was trying to be one of the people. Ross Perot, for example, has said, I'm not going to have motorcades, and I'm not going to have Hail to the Chief, and I'm for...
Well, that sounds like Jimmy Carter.
And that's Jimmy Carter. Okay, well, I don't know whether he's going to carry his own...
You really know how to hurt a guy,
so
don't you?
But he has said that, you know. He says we don't have a regal president and assumes that...
But when two other candidates...
Is this the other way to do it, by being so loose?
That's my point. When two other candidates are making such a point of traditional family values, whatever they are, for a guy to appear on television playing jazz with dark shades on the Arsenio Hall show after midnight, I don't think that enhances his standing on family values.
George, Mr. Malek said that the president has an agenda and he has a program, and it's a good one. But he called a news conference this last week, I guess, to outline it, to plug for the balanced budget amendment. And the networks, which could project this message, didn't show up.
Well, the networks made a news judgment, and they made, of course, the right one, which is if all he's going to do is come out and reiterate ad nauseum a commitment he's had for a very long time and has been ineffectual in pushing, then why cover it? And I think, by the way, the networks did the Bush campaign an enormous favor by not putting that manic and incoherent performance in front of a larger audience than it had anyway.
And quite aside from this campaign, I think the networks did right in reasserting the principle that the president cannot simply command the networks anytime he wants them for any purpose. I think
yeah, because what happens with electronic town halls where Ross Perot has said the government will pay for it and wants to sit down every 2 or 3 months and do 1-hour programs, and good luck in getting viewers.
Ross Perot may be worried about our imperial presidency we do periodically. He worries about Hail to the Chief and motorcades. Far more significant than motorcades is the fact that the networks now yawn when the president says, I'm going to address the nation. And Bill Clinton is on television saying, please pay attention to me, I'll play the saxophone. We are witnessing the collapse of a whole conception of the presidency as central to American life.
Well, the networks didn't yawn. Ronald Reagan, if my figure is correct, if I remember, held 31 primetime news conferences, and we showed up religiously. I mean, we said, now hi.
No, they turned him down once. They turned him down once, yes, when they thought it was politics.
Oh, where was I? Oh, I was covering Dukakis then.
Sam, as a master of excitement, okay, what is the president to do? He outlines his agenda, he tells where he stands on everything, and still he isn't able to capture what I call the passion, what somebody else calls excitement, what somebody else calls leadership. How do you do that?
But George Bush is a technocrat. He's an inside the Beltway guy. He is not an outsider. And what he should do is rehire James A. Baker III. Oh, come on, and come back and start running a campaign in which the beneficial side of that is projected.
That is the most inside the Beltway perception of all, which is that it's shuffle the nuts and bolts managers here inside the Beltway.
What
is George Bush to do? He can't run as Ross Perot.
He doesn't do anything. George Bush has been in public life for 67 years, and he's still trying to come up with what you call passion. Earlier this week, a senior White House official said, gosh, we don't understand why our message isn't getting out. We've given 40% more speeches on domestic policy than Reagan was giving at this point. Well, it's not quantity, it's quality.
Okay, Tom, you run the Bush campaign for a moment. What's he to do?
Well, I can't run the Bush campaign because he's president, and that makes a big difference. In 1988, when he was running, he was not president. And everybody thought then, you remember the cover in the news magazines, we were going to see George Bush the wimp. We didn't. And the reason was because he was astutely managed by Lee Atwater and others, and the wimp disappeared overnight. Now, in 1992, nobody can tell the president, I mean, he's the president. And we're seeing the wimp, the one we thought we were going to see in
well, that's why he needs his friend Baker back. Let me ask you about...
Well, I'm not sure
that. Well, he sure wasn't a wimp a year ago. We didn't see a wimp a year ago. Something happened in this last year.
Well, what happened with the recession, Barbara?
But even more than that. I mean, if you can project that kind of strength...
well, I think that's a significant point because he was a hero during the war. And while I don't want to make invidious predictions here, there are ample opportunities around the world for George Bush to play commander-in-chief again about next October.
Yeah, poor Saddam is going to be hit in October. You know, we're talking about the wrong guy, though, aren't we? Ross Perot. Now, what do you make of this? Talk about being managed. Perot, the outsider, the non-politician, the guy who says, I'm going to peel back the onion till I get to the core and get at the problem, has hired 2 smart, long-time political insiders to run his campaign.
Yes, but he didn't just hire 2 insiders. He hired a Republican and a Democrat. And that's where he's saying, see, look at me, I can work with both. I can get both.
Was it a good idea, George?
I think it was a good idea in that it bought him one day's news coverage, and maybe Sunday morning's got us still talking about it.
You mean he won't listen to Rollins and
I don't care whether he listens or not. It won't make a particle of difference. The American people aren't going to pull the voting lever on the basis of these guys. Sooner or later, he's going to talk, and the American people, not being silly, are going to decide whether or not what he says is
That's exactly right. And the 3 people we've had here this morning, in their different ways, representing the candidates, they've all said this is only June. What counts is what people are going to think in October, and that is true. A lot of things are going to happen between now and October.
Well, do you mean eventually you think Ross Perot is going to have to tell us whether he would slip the COLAs on Social Security, whether in fact he would trim Medicare?
I'm not saying that. I think he told Barbara on television that in 2 weeks he was going to come up with details on what he hitherto said was easy, and Mr. Rollins said he no longer believes is easy.
He said he was going to give us his list of where waste could be cut.
Yes,
He
but
didn't know what he's going to give you. What he said was, number one, I'm going to tell you where waste can be cut. Number two, you have to get jobs, and the banks will have to loosen
Barbara,
credit
on
to
your
small
show, I
business.
can't
When
remember
he began to delineate.
Which one was it? On your show and on Jesse Jackson's show, he contradicted himself. On one show, he said he seemed to suggest no new taxes. On the other show, he said he might in fact have to raise
With
taxes.
us, he said no new taxes.
Well, then
But
on Jackson
expanded
for
job
education.
base,
People don't get defeated for contradicting themselves.
They get defeated for raising taxes.
Exactly, and it doesn't matter so much whether he's going to reveal details as the fact that over these next 5 or 6 months, those details inevitably are going to become clear.
Do you think it's going to be personality or issues?
I think it's always personality.
If they get defeated for raising taxes,
I think it's always issues.
If they get defeated for raising taxes, you mean then they'll get elected for continuing huge deficits and maybe quintupling the national debt.
Polls and behavior indicate the same thing. The American people will pass dedicated taxes. They'll pass bonds for dedicated purposes. Taxes going for roads, taxes going for schools. They will not turn revenue over unless it's dedicated to this class of political
and I know
people.
it'd be silly to ask you who's going to win the election. Who's going to be the top two people, though, in the election?
Clinton and Bush.
I think it depends on how the economy goes. And if the economy...
Don't duck.
Oh, don't duck. Perot and Bush.
Clinton and Bush.
I think it's going to be Clinton and Bush also, but I'm betting nothing on it. And I'm going to burn the tape.
Gee, and I'm the only one who came out the other way. Well, I'd be a hero.
That's all the time we have. I enjoyed having you. Good to see you, Barbara. Hope you come back.
Thanks, Sam.
And I'll be back in just a moment.
Something is terribly wrong with these pictures, but you could look all day and not see it. The problem is carbon monoxide, an invisible, deadly pollutant emitted in auto exhaust. Fortunately, there's a way to help reduce these emissions. Ethanol, a renewable fuel derived from corn grown by the American farmer. And beginning November 1st, the Clean Air Act will require motor vehicles to use oxygenated fuels such as ethanol in 39 of the nation's most polluted cities during the 5 winter months. In 1988, when the program was introduced in the Denver area, atmospheric levels of carbon monoxide dropped 8% in the first 2 months. And this coming winter in Denver, the use of ethanol-blended fuels is expected to exceed 50% market share. So while the problem may be invisible, the solution is becoming clearer every day.
He was 50 when it happened. In 3 months, he went from perfect vision to almost total blindness. In test after test, doctors were at a loss. Finally, a test was done using GE's revolutionary magnetic resonance imager. Look at this. Incredible. The doctors discovered a tumor affecting his optic nerves, and he was treated. Within days, he got his vision back.
Hey, what a smile.
And everything that came with it.
Here's my final word. That's our program for today. David Brinkley will be back next Sunday. For all of us here at This Week with David Brinkley and ABC News, thank you and have a good day.
This Week with David Brinkley, brought to you by GE. From aircraft engines to appliances, we bring good things to life. And by ADM, supermarket to the world. If you wish a transcript, send $5 to This Week with David Brinkley, 1535 Grant Street, Denver, Colorado, 80203.
This Week with David Brinkley is a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source. Tonight, Billy Crystal. Is this good for you? And Alan King.
Well, what does he do? He's a professional embarrassment.
In a story about fathers and sons.
Who do you think sent you through medical school? Uncle Dave. Well, he could afford it.
The man is a pit bull.
Billy Crystal, Jo Beth Williams, and Alan King.
I love this.
A network television premiere, Memories of Me, tonight.
When news breaks, you'll see it first on the Channel 5 News 5 o'clock report. Channel 5's Metro News team will take you live to the scene, providing on-the-spot coverage. At 5 o'clock, only Channel 5 saves you money with exclusive consumer reports. And only Channel 5 offers Weather School, our innovative cooperative education program. Add Pam Dale's accurate weather forecasts and Keith Murphy's unique look at sports, and you've got a newscast guaranteed to keep you in touch. The Channel 5 News 5 o'clock report.
Channel 5 is proud to be a co-sponsor of a special event for kids from all over central Iowa. The 1992 Colonial Iron Kids Bread Triathlon will take place June 20th at the Ankeny YMCA. In the triathlon, every finisher is a winner. Kids ages 7 to 14 are invited to join in the fun.